Hey guys, before we get started, can I just ask that you hit the subscribe button on whatever device you are listening to this, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Please subscribe. It really helps the podcast out quite a bit. Okay, on to today's podcast. Do you think you can tell when someone is lying? Are their eyes shifty, or maybe their body language gives it away? Or maybe those aren't even the right clues and you really can't tell at all because of something called the truth default theory. My guest today is Tim Levine, PhD, Distinguished Professor and Chair of Communication Studies at University of Alabama, Birmingham. He is known internationally as a leader in deception research. His book, Duped, explains his truth default theory, the theory that when we communicate with people, honesty is the default. Naturally, he consults for law enforcement and intelligence and counterintelligence workers. He joins me now from the University of Alabama to help us identify honesty and deception.
Stand by. We're going live. We're going live. 9, going live. 7, 6, 5, going live. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Tim Levine, thank you for taking the time to share your work. I came across your research and I really wanted to bring it to as many people as I could, especially because we are in an election year and people are asking me, how can you tell when someone's telling the truth? And so I figure bring you in and let you explain that.
Well, thank you. Happy to be here. And sadly, oftentimes we can't.
Yeah, and we're going to get into that. We are going to get into that. Now, you've been teaching communication and researching, studying all aspects of communication for, would you say, about 30 years now?
Right.
And I have to start off with the first question because you are a communicator. What goes through your mind 10 seconds to air or 10 seconds before you speak on this or talk to some of the students?
Oh, I'm thinking about going to the gym later or the conversation I had with the student before class or the paper I'm going to be working on later. Especially for podcasts. I don't want to know what the questions are going to be because I think it will come off better if it's spontaneous.
Okay.
And most communication, I think, will be better for the audience if we're just having a conversation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's what we're about to do. So let's get started. You started off by saying, how do we tell? I asked you, how can you tell if someone's telling the truth? And you said most of the time, you can't. Really?
Really.
Why is that?
Well, there's two reasons. And it's like everything more complicated than that. But the first reason is this idea of the truth fault, is that the idea that they might be lying to us just very often doesn't occur to us. And we're just kind of taking people as they seem at face value and going from there in real time, talking to them. And the second reason is because there aren't any real good real-time tells, except in the case where you already know what the truth is. So if I know what the truth is and then you're telling me something that's false, then I can go, oh, that's not right. But if I don't know what the truth is, and our research shows that most of the times when people do detect deception, it's well after the fact. We did a study where we asked people to tell us about the last time they caught somebody lying to them and how they do it. And something like 85% of the stories, the discovery happened well after the initial interaction. And what very often happens is the truth can just, you're walking down the sidewalk and the truth jumps up in front of you. And then you look back at that thing that somebody told you and you realize, oh, that wasn't right.
But do you still want to believe what they have said? Or are you able to conceptualize and change your mind to say, it's not true.
We all have had the experience of learning that something's not true.
Mm-hmm.
And this is definitely something humans can do. It's harder to do than just to take things as is. But it's,
meaning
it's,
what?
it's,
Wait, let's hold on that for a second. So it's harder to do what?
to decide that something's false
Yeah.
than to assume that it's true.
It's hard to decide that something's false than assume that it's true. There are things that come out in politics that we know, for example, are not true. And
Yes.
we hear them, we take them in, we want to believe that they're true.
Maybe if it's the other side, we don't want to believe that's true. So there's definitely bias processing going on, because we want to have communication that aligns with what we already believe and what people in our social groups already believe. So there's a thing in psychology called confirmation bias, and when it's the preaching to the choir thing.
Okay, so let's start with confirmation bias first then, because that is what we're actually looking for when we're communicating first level.
When you and I are talking, we don't come into our conversation a blank slate. We both have pre-existing beliefs, pre-existing values, pre-existing attitudes. And these color how we hear things and how we perceive things. So confirmation bias is simply the tendency that if information aligns with what I already believe and I think is already true, then I'm more likely to believe it. And if the information goes against what I think, then it's that much easier to doubt it.
So how do we change someone's mind then?
This is a whole nother podcast. So there's a whole social science of persuasion and influence.
Okay, well let's go into because we're talking. I started off asking about politics, and we are in a political election year, very important one. If what we're looking for is just information that confirms what we already believe, how can a politician or a party or ever change your mind? It seems to me that two politicians are out there vying for people to vote for them, and are they trying to change people's mind? I mean, do they even have a chance?
Probably most of the people that they might switch to them are people who aren't strongly committed either way. So probably most of the persuasive arguments and political advertising is really only targeting a tiny percentage of the population. Most of the voting population in America, I guess, already knows who they're gonna vote for, and occasionally big conversions happen, but they're fairly unusual. Most of us, don't start out with one worldview and decide, oh, today's Tuesday, I'm gonna have a different worldview today.
Yeah, that doesn't happen. So what does it take to change that view completely?
Sometimes it can just be a eureka moment for a person. Sometimes evidence can mount up that I like to believe that, we can deceive other people, but the truth is a real thing, and it's persistent, and we can try to deny it and try to deny it and try to deny it, but at a certain point, the truth has a way of kind of, I'm not sure the word I'm looking for, of pushing itself forward. Yeah.
Permeating the conversation, permeating the communication. We'll leave it at that.
Yes.
Okay.
And it depends too on how committed you are to the prior position. So generally, the more committed you are to the position, the harder it's going to be. The more evidence
You're going to need.
Because humans are great at rationalizing, right? All this evidence cannot be out there and they can rationalize and rationalize and rationalize it. But at some point, there's just too much is out of alignment. And we need to recenter ourselves, or everybody else will just think we're crazy.
So go back a second to the truth default, because when we first are hearing information, we want to believe that what we're hearing is honest. That is, I mean, if we doubted everything that we heard, that would not be good for communication or society or culture, would it? How would we function?
Well, this is the core thesis of truth default theory, is that, humans are inherently social beings, and we have to communicate with our other humans to survive. And if we second guessed everything we heard, and if we were equally likely to deceive as we were to be honest, then communication would lose all its efficiency and efficacy. And we would just live in this total world of uncertainty, and we couldn't ever get anything done, and we couldn't ever meet anybody new because we wouldn't trust them. There'd be no difference between fiction and nonfiction, and economy couldn't work because you didn't trust any kind of economic interactions, and the world would just fall apart.
So it's a good thing. So
it's a very good thing, right, with a very small cost.
With a very small cost. Okay. So are there cues that we should pick up on? Truth default is we do believe what we hear at first glance. We do believe it. Some people will say, not me. I can tell when someone's lying. I know because of X, Y, and Z. Your research shows not true? Not true.
Nope. Well, most people believe that. Most people are very overconfident in their ability to detect deception. We put them in the lab and
I love it.
Show that maybe this is true for some people. We just haven't found them yet.
Maybe what's true for some people, that they actually really can tell?
Maybe they just haven't shown up in one of my experiments yet.
So what does show up in the research?
That people tend to believe, and when they don't believe, people do believe in cues.
They believe in the cues.
Yes.
Okay.
And so when somebody's acting very anxious, or maybe they're a little bit on the spectrum or socially awkward, people mistake these things for deception. And the trouble is those cues all communicate or come from reasons besides just that people are lying and telling the truth, and we're very likely to misread them. And there is a way to tell when people are lying, but it has nothing to do with cues. It's listening very carefully to what people are saying.
Okay.
If at all possible, fact check. You can fact check in two ways. One is I can do my research up front and then ask you a question I know the answer perfectly well to and see what you say. Or second, I can do my best to try to find out what the truth is through external evidence.
Okay.
And if I don't have hard evidence, I can at least try to estimate plausibility. Does what you're saying make sense? Do you have a motive for deception? Because the truth default works both ways. Most people are honest unless they have a reason not to be. So if they don't have a reason to deceive you, they're probably honest.
And how often are people actually lying?
It's only a tiny percent of their overall communication.
But sometimes it can be in a pretty significant moment. You have intelligence, you have spies, you have financial crooks, you have the Bernie Madoffs of the world. Are there cues there that we should have picked up on, or where was it in the listening, the fact checking, the evidence? Where do people go wrong in those situations? Because those people, you really do want to believe that they're honest.
It depends, from circumstance to circumstance. I suspect with the Bernie Madoff case, it's very unlikely that somebody would detect that. It was a very elaborate fraud. If he was easy to detect, people would have detected him.
But even when there was evidence,
I don't think there was evidence that it was a Ponzi scheme. I think there was evidence that maybe his books weren't all lining up quite right. So there were, because part of what he was doing was proprietary, people didn't know how he was getting his returns. And certainly if I'm running an investment vehicle that is competing with other investment, I'm not going to tell you my secret sauce. There was cues that maybe something wasn't right, but I'm not sure people could move from that to Ponzi scheme, of course,
right?
Seamlessly. And I think the evidence that wasn't so obvious at the time, in real time, was the fact that people didn't make that inference.
So you're saying there wasn't enough evidence for us to change completely what we thought, because we wanted to believe, especially if he was making money for you, you wanted to believe what he was telling you was true, even if there was some evidence that suggested this is unlikely, his investments are unlikely, no one else has ever done this before, but not enough evidence for me to completely change my mind.
Right. So there's the whole confirmation bias, right? They've been investing with this guy for a long, long time. Do you have a bank account?
Yeah.
How do you know your bank's real and not a fictitious entity?
Yeah, you're right. I trust the bank. I want to believe that they're honest.
Federally insured, there's these sources of legitimization. Other people put their money in the bank too. There's a lot of things going on besides just confirmation bias. Except for this example, and even with this example, I don't seriously entertain the idea that my bank might be an entirely fictitious, fraudulent entity. Just an elaborate ruse where they, make up logos and decorate buildings, right? And that's a little outside the box,
right? Right.
So,
there's not enough evidence.
I think there were some red flags with Madoff. I think there were some other explanations for why that might have been something other than an outright fraud. I think there was lots of other people investing in him, which gave people confidence. And, licensees and regulatory agencies that vetted him and legitimized him. And there was lots going on. And when you view it all in totality, the red flags were a pretty small little bit of them.
You mentioned listening, fact checking evidence, right? Those are the keys that you're looking for. You're not necessarily looking for cues, which brings me to the Amanda Knox case, right? She was the student that was studying in Italy that was accused of murdering her roommate. She didn't appear, people said, right? Even the investigators and the public, she didn't appear to have remorse, or she didn't look like she didn't do it. She looked, all these cues that we think, she looked like she was lying. She acted cold, all of these things. And you say not legitimate. And those are not cues to be looking for.
Yes. Because those can mean lots of things besides just whether people are lying or not. In my book, I introduced the idea of matched and mismatched people.
What does that mean?
And maybe it's better to talk about matched and mismatched communication. But we all have this kind of idea about how honest people act and how fraudulent, lying people, how liars act. Then there's how people are portraying themselves, and sometimes the matched aligns. So the really, really bad liar is matched, and the sincere appearing honest person is matched. But they can also be mismatched. So we can have people who come off as insincere when in fact they're they're honest. And the flip side of that is the really smooth liars.
Yeah.
And or lies. And when we hit one of these, we're very systematically right or wrong, depending on whether we're in a matched or mismatched situation. And the trouble is, we don't know in advance which one of these we're in. And they both exist. And so people make very systematic errors when they're relying on cues and demeanor to assess honesty.
So how do you go about when you're communicating? Do you fall into the default theory? Do you believe everything that you hear? What are you looking for?
So the first thing I ask myself, is this something important or not?
Okay.
And if it's not important, I don't worry about it.
For example,
so I know that most people are probably honest, so the odds are in my favor in trusting people.
Okay.
Plus, you're more likely to make friends and influence people, right? If you give them the benefit of the doubt, right? The odds are in your favor, and this is good communication practice for other reasons.
Right.
When it's something important, I try to do my due diligence. And if I can do some kind of fact checking on it, I do. If I can't, I try to put off the truth default and just kind of suspend judgment.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If I don't know either way, it could be either. I try to. Humans, I don't think are designed to suspend judgment for very long, but I try to just say, you don't know. Act accordingly.
How do you coach the intelligence world to identify someone who might be lying in the intelligence world, like a spy?
So my number one bit of advice is to just ignore demeanor and cues. If you don't want to do that, then treat them as red flags and not as deception cues.
Well, what does that mean?
So if I notice that you're playing with your pen right now,
mm-hmm.
and maybe this means that you're a little nervous, and maybe that's because you're lying to me, and then you just did this eyebrow flash to me. So now I'm really suspicious, right? So not to make the leap into presuming that you're lying, but instead to formulate my questions so I can figure out what's really going on with these particular behaviors.
I love it.
And what's right? Maybe this is just an habitual thing. Maybe if I went and watched a lot of videos of you during podcasts, I would notice the same sort of behavior and notice that this is very typical, and that I shouldn't make anything of it.
Okay. Or maybe I saved it just for you, and so I'm scheming something.
Yeah. So then I could start, but again, I'm considering
how important is that?
So we've never met before.
Right.
Right. So I have no real idea if you're really a podcaster or not.
But you probably did your research.
Well, I could go on the web and see a web page, but you could float that up, right? It wouldn't be that hard, right?
Yeah.
If you've got access to the, we're using Riverside. So, if you were a scammer, you'd probably be using Zoom or Microsoft Meetings or something.
Right.
Riverside's a little bit more sophisticated operation. You've got a tech person, but you could fish academics with this, right? You could create a fake website for a podcast. You could, I don't know how expensive Riverside is, but you could get it.
Yeah.
You could hire a professional actor to pretend to be your tech person.
Yeah.
And you could stand this up. But why would you do this? So in this case, there doesn't seem to be any motive. And if I did fall for a prank like this, it would be funny. It would be the best story value. It would prove my truth default theory.
So wait, that's a good motive.
I would get so much mileage out of this.
Isn't that a good motive?
If so, it would work out in my favor, I think.
Maybe I'm actually a comedian and you don't know that.
Yes.
And
Yes.
And
if this were the case, I would find this deeply amusing.
right.
So I work through these kind of things
Okay.
but most of the time you can just presume, you're much safer presuming that, this person you're talking to is really who they say they are. But someday there's some chance that I might get pranked.
Okay, so you say pranked, but let's talk about duped. I feel like duped is more direct, and duped has some consequences. If I'm getting duped by something that is important, how do I go into that? So for example, you talked about banking. Let's say you have a financial planner, or you're dating someone new, or you've got a friend, or there's some stakes at this relationship or communication. What's my first level of deciding if we're going to trust each other?
If it's a high level financial risk, right, then at least I behave very differently than if it's not. If it's just a new friend, I'll give people the benefit of the doubt, and that's not going to be the end of the day if there's a little deception there. But I just opened up a new bank account. I'm transferring money into it, so I'm sending. I'm number one, I'm worried about, getting the routing numbers and the account numbers right and everything like this. So I'm testing, I'm getting the links established. So with higher stakes financial, I'm certainly, I'm going to check to make sure they're federally insured. I'm not going to have more money in there than is federally insured. I don't know for a fact that our government's going to exist in the future, but it seems likely that it will. So I think this is a pretty safe bet. But I'm not going to let it paralyze me because of the fear of fraud. But I am going to check to make sure. In the case of the bank, I checked with other people that they know and they've done business with, and, that they had good people who I know and people I trust had good experiences.
So you're
them.
Really looking for evidence, it sounds like.
Yes.
You do. You look for evidence.
I'm doing evidence when I'm asking thoughtful questions, and I'm really listening carefully to what is said. Okay. So I try to ignore the body language and the facial expressions and all that, and I'm listening to what the words mean, trying my best to understand those in the context, and particularly how they fit into a bigger picture. And does everything align?
Is it different if you're dealing with a man versus a woman?
For me, no. I've not seen any evidence of major sex differences in deception, although there might be tiny differences that men might lie a little bit more than women, but it's completely swamped by what I would call individual differences.
Is that research?
So if we look at the population,
okay.
Men might tell 1/10 of a lie more a day than women. But for all that's completely irrelevant.
How often do people actually lie?
Most people lie somewhere between 0 and 2 times a day.
What? That's a lot.
Compared to how many things you say?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm going to lie twice today, on average?
On average. But chances are you won't lie that much because the average is inflated by a few people who lie a whole lot. So there's a few prolific liars out there that, might tell 15, 16, 20 lies in a day. And that drives up the average and hides the fact that the majority of people will tell 0 lies today.
And how do we know if somebody's a perpetual liar, a really egregious, they're stacking the 15, they're having the 15 times a day?
It depends on what those 15 or 16, if you've got the friend that is just always giving you a little better than compliments than is really true. We can probably live with that.
I like that,
Right?
friend. I like
They're
that,
telling me
friend.
how much they like my fish shirt, and then they don't really like it that much. This isn't bothering me. But if we get into the realm of pathological lying or really fraudulent manipulative behaviors, then this is deeply problematic. And for those people who are unfortunate enough to know somebody like that, it's really unsettling because it's a real problem, and it gets these people fired. Because what happens is over time the truth comes out,
Right.
and it gets these people fired from the jobs, and it destroys their relationships,
Right.
and they constantly have to be finding new sets of people to dupe,
Right.
because other people catch on.
Mm.
And the thing is, if I know somebody like this, and I know that you know them too, I'm going to tell you about this, right? So there's a longer game in social networks, and these deceptive people, even the really sophisticated ones like Madoff, eventually get outed,
Yeah.
right? The Ponzi scheme eventually crumbles.
So what happens age-wise? Like, I'm thinking about, you're a kid, you're a preteen, you're a teenager, you're adult. At what point do you start to lie? I'm going to say, because I think that teens might test the waters and kind of lie about certain things, see what they can get away with. That's not so cute when they get into their 20s, 30s, and 40s. How does that evolve?
Great question. You're right on target. So little kids can say things that are false, but they really don't understand how deception works. So for me to really dupe you, I have to be able to understand how you see things.
Okay.
And do something or say something to mislead you.
Okay.
So a lot of 3-year-olds might not be able to do this. 2-year-olds might not be able to do this. By somewhere between age 3 and 5, kids start telling rudimentary lies that are pretty easy to detect. They get better and better and better at this until they hit high school, by which times most humans can lie perfectly well and deceive people. Lying increases with age, reaches a peak at the teenage years. So teens will lie on average twice as much as older adults. And then lying gradually declines over the lifetime. Maybe in part just because we get more comfortable with ourselves and we have less to lie about. And we can better navigate situations so we don't have to.
Do liars know that they're lying?
It depends on how you'd define lying. So if lying is a deliberate intentional act, then absolutely by definition they do. But people, of course, can say false things that they believe.
Right.
And people can have, incorrect. So people can tell you things that are factually false and not be deceptive according to a definition that requires intent or awareness.
Right.
So it's a definitional question.
Yeah. Because I can think of people who definitely don't tell the truth.
Right.
But then I guess I in talking to you now, I say, well, what is the truth? I mean, that's probably what they're thinking. Well, what I'm telling you is the truth. I think it's the truth. But where do we draw that line if they're trying to deceive me? I mean, they believe what they're saying, right? Isn't there a scenario where someone who is lying actually believes what they're saying?
Yes.
And then as long as you do.
I have this kind of 4-pronged test when I'm trying to sort this out in my mind.
Okay.
So the first is what's being said, does it depart meaningfully from the truth as best I can understand what the truth is? So there's something false or misleading there. Then I ask myself, would a reasonable person in our culture be fooled by this? So if it is said sarcastically, then it's not literally true, but I would understand that this is sarcasm, or this is parody, or this is fiction. So if I'm watching a fictional show on TV, it's not true, but we know it's fiction, right? So there's no deception involved in
right.
Then I ask myself, should the person know, or at least reasonably should they know what the truth is? And if the answer is maybe not, then maybe it's false, but it's not like this constant deliberate deception. Because sometimes people believe their own BS.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And then the last question I ask is, because people only deceive others when the truth is a problem.
Say that again. People only deceive
Others when the truth is a problem.
Oh.
Right. So this is part of the truth default too. We're honest as a default. So we're just communicating until we have this, oh, I can't say that. So does the nature of the falsehood solve a problem that the truth wouldn't, pragmatically, for how the communication works?
Oh.
And if the answer to all four of those align, then I'm pretty confident saying, oh, this is deception. And if not, depending on what's going on, it's either ambiguous, or maybe they believe it, but it's not objectively true, or so forth.
So how big of a problem, or how big of a, maybe problem's not the right word, but I'm hearing all that you're saying, and I'm saying, okay, so the truth, we want to believe what someone tells us is the truth. I am not that good at actually identifying when someone's lying.
In real time.
Okay. I do have a few not cues, but I now know what to look for, and they're not going to be cues that are visual.
Or more precisely, what to listen for.
Right. I'm going to look for some evidence. Is it really that big of a deal that we believe most of what we hear?
I think it's a very good thing for us. We just can't be a social species without doing this.
We have to believe most of what we hear.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you imagine the ants trying to make an ant hole when one ant doesn't believe the other ant? So one's putting the dirt in, another one's right. So this is an overly simplistic example.
Right.
If you start doing these kind of thought experiments, I hope your listeners will see why it really kind of has to be this way.
Yeah, it does have to be this way. And it works. It works for society. It works for human connection. I see the argument for it. What I'm concerned about is we're in an election year and people need to know the truth. So, Mr. Levine, I would love for you to give listeners just something to think about when they hear a politician, so that they can look for and find the truth. And if their mind needs to change one way or another, and I'm not suggesting either one, I'm just saying to be open to finding truth in this scenario, because the stakes, there are big stakes. And what you said was one of those things. Is this important or not? And
yes,
we're going to say it is important. Therefore, we need to determine if what we're hearing is true or not.
I don't accept the premise.
You don't?
I don't.
Okay. Reframe it.
I think for a lot of, so the first question is from voter out there. Would knowing the truth change how you vote? And if this candidate is my candidate and I'm sticking with that no matter what, then that's fine. You're entitled to your vote, because people, can believe what they want to believe. And I don't feel comfortable telling other people how. I'll take responsibility for what I believe, and I'm perfectly comfortable letting other people believe what they want to believe. If they want to know the truth, then approach things like either a journalist, a good, really reputable, honest journalist, and do your best to fact check. and triangulate with multiple sources of information, or act like a good ethical scientist and try to collect data and get at the facts. But it's journalistic fact checking and the scientific method are the best ways that humans have developed to try to get at the truth and try to practice those skill sets.
Mm-hmm.
But I think people believe all kinds of things, and they have the right to believe whatever they want.
Yes. And I like how you reframed kind of my question, because it was definitely two-parted. And you're right. It's not a question of people. I'm deciding that people need to go out and find the truth. So I like that subtlety that you identified. If you want to find the truth, and I
Yes.
get that question often, is people ask me, how do you know when someone is telling the truth? And I love that you said, you don't.
You don't, but try to look for evidence,
But you
and that's
can-
your best bet.
But you can look for evidence. Is there anything that I didn't ask you in relation to the truth default theory that you want to mention?
I think we did a remarkably good job of covering the core ideas in just under 44 minutes.
Wow. Okay. Well,
This was a very efficient talk,
okay.
and hopefully fun and engaging.
Yeah. Well, I certainly enjoyed it. What else are you working on? What's coming up next for you?
I have a bunch of little small studies, kind of filling in little gaps here and there, and I'm not sure what the next really big step in truth default theory is going to be right now. I'm starting a new job in October.
Oh.
I'm sorry, in January, at a new university, and that will come with a bunch of graduate students and a lab.
Ooh.
And I better have some good ideas.
Can you say what university it is?
Yes, University of Oklahoma.
University of Oklahoma. Okay. All right. So you better have some good ideas. Well, I will be sure to include all the links to access you in these notes. So if anyone comes up with some good hypotheses they want you to investigate and do some research on, they'll be sure to be able to get to you.
Oh, that'd be fantastic.
Thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you for having me.
This was a lot of fun for me.
This was delightful.
This podcast is for information only. It is in no way medical advice. As always, consult your doctor for medical advice.